Well, welcome aboard, everybody, to another interesting discussion and hopefully debate over real issues and real values. I'm delighted to introduce John. And just before I do that, I just ask you any comments or questions, please put them in chat. I will then try to make sure that everybody gets a chance to raise their issues and raise their questions, and I'll do my very best to try and keep it organized. Now, John's a member of KCOR, and he has written a book on the renewable energy transition. He's a small business owner. He is associated with an outfit called the Canadians for a Sustainable Society, and he has weighed in on a number of our discussions in the past on values, on growth, on substitutes for ways in which we actually make decisions. The name of his presentation today is really focusing on populism and rebuilding the national conversation. That's an interesting challenge, John, and I'm not going to go on very long. I'm just going to say, please start, get everybody arguing, and we should have a very good time. So over to you.
Okay, well, if we're arguing, that means we're talking. And I think with the advent of populism meant that we weren't talking. So in this talk, it's probably going to be the least scientific that this group has had for a while. A lot of opinion, a lot of observation. And I'm going to try and define roughly what populism is, why it occurs, how it manifests itself, what caused it, and how to put the national conversation back together, possibly. And the glorious learning opportunity we've had in the last year and a half, which will seemingly continue with COVID-19. I think that's rearranged the way a lot of people have been thinking. And it's maybe a little bit of shock treatment. So I hope we can remember after the pandemic why we did so poorly in it, rather than just get caught up in the rush to reestablish business as usual. So here we go. Populism, I think it comes under a number of different names. I think any time an elite the interests of elites become separated from the well-being of the people they are actually supposed to be leading, you have the development of populism. It can manifest itself in many different forms. I think it's a general disconnect, and populism may be the root issue, the root manifestation, but that grows up. When it comes to action, populism acquires different names. And so I think history, a huge amount of the social history we've had has essentially been grown out of populist movements or agitation. Population is a symptom of the decline of one large group, namely most of the people, and the ascendancy of another smaller group, or the maintenance of another smaller group, the elites, probably with high levels of inequality and worsening levels of inequality. And one group the elites feeling they don't have to listen to the complaints, or they can't do anything about the complaints of the majority. So they're isolated either by position or by the fact that they find themselves helpless. I believe the storming of the Bastille in the French Revolution took place on the day when grain prices reached their highest, reached a record high. And it was just that little bit. Maybe it was 1 centime higher than it had been the day before, but just that little bit was enough to take all of the discontent that had been building up and push people to the point where they just attacked a well-fortified military complex, in effect, with brooms and hammers. So I think there's always going to be some level of discontent within a society. When it builds up, anything can set it off. And we shouldn't read necessarily what sets it off as the fundamental problem. Okay, fundamental to discontent is when a sizable portion of the public of all aspects, broadly, lose their faith in their leaders and institutions. And that certainly has been happening in the Western world in terms of loss of confidence in politicians and in the media. So the conversation, people don't have faith that their interests are being represented. They can't see their interests being represented in the national conversation. So they feel perhaps that they're being talked to rather than listened to. And populism, as this discontent builds, it distills into movements centered around left wing or right wing, and you come up with some lightning rod figure, some really strong leader, strong for any reason, like Trump. I'm going to be mentioning Trump quite a few times, but he's not the message, he's the messenger. And he figured out how to exploit this particular this discontent. Bernie Sanders as well would have tapped into the same discontent to a fair degree, I believe. The experience of populist supporters. This is maybe we're talking about the Western world in the last 30 or 40 years. We've seen a broad number of people have seen declining real incomes, loss of good jobs, declining job quality. A lot of the best jobs are shipped overseas and outsourced with free trade. And these individuals may be in communities where they've seen the decline of the community, both that they live in and also in the withering infrastructure of business that they used to work in, the structure of suppliers and various craftsmen. They just seem to disappear. They see that there are lower prospects for their children than they had. The children are having difficulty getting going. They can't afford reasonable housing. They're having gig jobs, contract jobs, short term, maybe 2 or 3 jobs at a time. And their quality of life is declining. They've been pushed out of their own cities in many cases by costs and congestion. And the inequality is a huge issue. Canada had, in the early 60s, Canada had the second highest level of equality, income equality on the planet. And now we're down into the mid-20s. And I believe it's the case that the housing inflation and low wages or stagnant wages is a perfect engine of inequality. That's perfectly represents it. You've all seen, I just picked this off a few days ago. You've all seen this, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and you get this division so that average family incomes adjusted for inflation, basically you start here. The bottom 90% have lost 10%. This is a change from 2002 to 2012. I don't know if it's relevant to have more recent data. Everything I've read indicates that this has gotten much worse during COVID. But you can see that the super rich are doing extremely well. And I believe that's mostly stock market and asset inflation, housing, real estate inflation, et cetera. So that's just an illustration of one of the many things you'd see to support the idea that there is a growing divergence of fortunes between the very rich and most other people. The Globe and Mail used to call itself the national conversation. A national conversation was, or good good media, a good newspaper was like a nation talking to itself, which I think is fabulous, but that hasn't happened for decades. I believe a significant percentage of people simply do not see their concerns acknowledged in the media, and perhaps they're even disparaged in the media. One of the fascinating things, I really avoid trying to keep track of American politics, but the 2016 election to me was just completely compelling, because you had Hillary Clinton, who was certainly qualified to be president, and she was at the head of the Democratic Party, which is the party of the working man, in my view, or it has been for the last 50 years in my mind. She absolutely, and I was flabbergasted by this when Trump was raising his issues of job quality, get wages up, bring jobs back to America, bring high quality jobs back to America, close the border. All Hillary Clinton had to do, in my view, was reach out with a few statements to blue collar and low income workers and say, we care about you. We know there's a problem and we're going to fix it. I don't think she had to be specific, but she just had to reach out. And I don't believe she did that. And then of course, there was a deplorables remark, which was staggering. Anyway, I believe it would have been so simple for her to win. But she just didn't acknowledge what to me should have been the base of the Democratic Party. And in my view, Bernie should have been the candidate. But anyway, Hillary had the election and she lost to Trump. I don't think so much won it. I think Hillary lost it. So what elected Trump? How did this populism manifest itself in terms of a political platform? Trump broke the rules and started naming the elephants in the room. Things that are being talked about in coffee shops, but not in the media. Illegal immigration, de facto open borders, resulting in stagnant or lowering wages. Globalism, loss of good jobs, endless foreign wars. This was really interesting to me because I was able to watch Steve Bannon for about 10 minutes do a talk a couple of years ago. And essentially he laid out why Trump won the election. And he talked about everything I've got there. But the thing he laid out that I was completely, explained that I was completely unaware of was Americans, despite what you think about them as being aggressive and looking for payback in the Middle East and all of this, the Americans, individuals, those who serve and their communities, their families are sick of fighting wars. And he mentioned one figure, that there were 9 million Americans under the Veterans Administration getting hospital aid. I just discounted that. And it wasn't until I stumbled across it about 6 months later that yes, there are 9 million Americans in the VA and getting their medical care through VA. And these people are just sick and tired of fighting wars. They do it out of patriotism, duty, but they're sick of it. Community disintegration is in the Rust Belts, the areas that have lost high quality jobs, drug use, unemployment, you name it. Yeah, even in these areas, the estimated life expectancy has gone down, declining quality of life, corrupt media. Corrupt is my word, but I think there's a direct connection between financial interests and the way media cover issues or don't, and the political system. And in terms of Trump, if you're dissatisfied, if you think the system has to change, there was no alternative. There was Trump and there was Clinton. So you're either voting for Trump or you're voting for what essentially was Wall Street. Bernie who, in my opinion, should have been the Democratic candidate, but he was displaced by Clinton and the Democratic hierarchy. Anyway, so that's why these are the issues I believe that gave a guy like Donald Trump, who shouldn't be elected for anything, given his personality, this is what got him elected. And by the way, for those who think Trump is stupid, I think exactly the opposite. I don't like the guy, but I don't like his manner, but he had everybody hated him going into the 2016 election. He had no political allies, and he ended up winning. So he was doing something right. And it was a very divisive, American politics, and I believe Canada as well, and in the West generally, there just isn't the communication. People, you raise the name Trump and people will just walk away. They can't deal with it. I mean, who really does want to listen to him? But it also blows back the other way. And here's some of the opinions. Like, these groups don't talk to each other, and that's the point. We have to find a basis on which the community conversation can be put back together. Otherwise, it's just high energy mudslinging. Okay, the world of never Trumpers. So the people who really can't stand Trump, and I'm talking about how many people actually like Trump. Aside from that, let's talk about the platform. So the people who just don't believe the platform that Trump represented had any validity at all. And it was all a pack of lies, and Trump was just fooling everybody. How many of those people have shared the experience or are familiar with the experience of the people who actually voted for Trump, which is almost 50% of the American voter. So again, there's the people who have been fighting America's endless wars. They don't want to do it anymore, neither do their families. How many of the people of the never Trumpers have lost their jobs to outsourcing, or seen their company close or move due to free trade, witnessed their community wither? Those people maybe don't live in those communities. They live somewhere else. Have they been forced to move out of their house, out of their city or town because of housing inflation? And have they seen their children flounder in a gig job labor market? Maybe, maybe not. I would say higher incomes, better educated people. Even if your children have had really good education, I think the gig job labor market is having an effect on everybody. It takes many children are into their 30s by the time they begin to get established, whereas in my aged generation, I mean, you were pretty well on your way in your mid-20s. Okay, what's in a name? Trump managed to take over the Republican Party and apparatus, despite great resistance from within the party. I mean, nobody in any establishment liked Donald Trump or wanted him to get into office. But he managed to take it over, and so he could be called a Republican, something familiar. But I think the party, he was leading a movement. I think much more than an established party, and it's the people who are just fed up, and that would have included some Democrats as well. But anyway, the disaffection was the substance of his campaign, and he tapped into that disaffection and became elected. So going into 2020, what was Trump's record versus election promises? He did cut immigration. He did build the wall and cut down on illegal immigration. Reversing globalism, well, he made some noise about it. Maybe he did a little bit. Cleaning up Wall Street, zero, he did nothing on that. So he, that's unfortunate. He didn't do anything about Wall Street, but climate change is a Chinese fraud. Unfortunately, that's a promise he kept. He gutted some of the environmental regulations. He did stop, despite all the what appeared to be chaos on the foreign front. He did stop fighting endless wars, and this statistic is new, the 0 US combat deaths in Afghanistan 2020. That to me is pretty remarkable. And he did create better jobs at the low end and increase wages at the low end. And also he promised to bring back coal. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Because the market, natural gas is just much cheaper than coal, and who really is going to invest in coal? So despite his promises, that didn't happen. So as a politician, he actually did a relatively good job of keeping his promises going into 2020, especially the promises to the base, people who really were getting crushed and wanted to see change. But going into 2020, the election was his to lose. And Trump's management style of chaos met the pandemic. And although Trump didn't lose the election because of COVID-19, he lost it, I believe, because of his reaction to COVID-19. If he'd done a decent job on COVID-19, he would have, even with 100, 200,000 dead, he would have done, he still would have gotten elected. But he just, I think his treatment of his almost ridiculous confusion that he sowed during the pandemic, the government policy was just too much for too many people. But he didn't lose by a heck of a lot. He got 73 million votes. And that's the second most after Biden that any American presidential candidate has ever received. And Trump, his support in the lower incomes, I think was relatively solid. Anyway, so to illustrate that there was an issue here, a fundamental upwelling of discontent, I'd like to take you on a flight of fantasy here. And what if the Republicans had been led into the 2020 election by a similarly privileged white man with Trump's record, except he was a gentleman, professional, presidential, and did a reasonable job with COVID-19? Hillary Clinton made the famous statement that Donald Trump was temperamentally unsuited to be president, and there was never a truer statement, I don't think. But so separating the politician from the platform, if either Romney or Al Gore, now neither one of these would have run on this platform. I think Romney is probably a globalist and Al Gore would have been much stronger on the environment. But running on this platform of achievement of 4 years, who wins in 2020? I think Romney is likely to lose to both Romney and Gore if they had run on Trump's platform and record. So that's just trying to illustrate that populism, the discontent, the fundamental issues that Trump at least addressed and mentioned were still driving forces in the 2020 election. It wasn't a one election event. So you've got, what strikes me about the American system, and it hasn't manifested here in itself here to the degree in Canada, but I think that's largely due to lack of media diversity. But in the US, there's just a tremendous divergence, and the political effort is not to convince other people from the other party to understand you and vote for you. The emphasis is on energizing your base because it's so polarized. The opinions are so polarized that only 5 or 10% of people are going to change their vote. But when did this great divergence start? From my point of view, the level of stratification in our society led to the development of barriers to communication. And that happens in every society that becomes stratified, I believe. As societies become more sophisticated, that's one of the key reasons for their downfall: complexity and stratification. The elites just cannot relate to fundamental problems and change their policies. Also, I believe we turn from nation building to GDP building of the development of the commercial size of the commercial economy without looking at how well people were doing in that larger economy. The leading sectors of finance and development had, in my opinion, over the last 40 years, negative effects on most people. And dense urbanization, globalization, and control of the money system was handed to private banks. I think this sort of buries social issues under the mandate of growing the economy. So now, if you're a politician or a stockbroker or someone who's doing extremely well in this very hot financial market, speaking to people who do not share your views and who want other metrics to come into play is extremely tedious. I spoke to the highly regarded mayor, ex-mayor of Midland, my old town, and he felt that any challenge to growth would be regarded by most municipal politicians as strictly fringe. So anyone challenging that concept just wouldn't be listened to. Okay, the democratic mechanism. You can have votes, you can have elections, and you can have high participation rates, but the machinery is worthless if it isn't accompanied by full spectrum national conversation, which includes everybody. Everybody has a chair at the table, clear national goals, and illuminating metrics. So you need a worthwhile conversation to validate, to allow a democratic system to really work. I think we've lost our way on that. We have the mechanism, but we don't have the conversation. People call each other liars a great deal in this environment, particularly in the States. Everybody's lying about everything. But I think you can look at Canada's broken promises on, this is CO2 emissions, climate change, all the, John Holland's made this graph. I think it's fabulous. Where we should have, what we promised to do, where we should have been, and what we actually did do. Now, the Kyoto Accord, Canada was supposed to reduce its level of emissions from by 6% by 2012 over the 1990 level. In fact, our emissions went up 19%, so that we had a miss of 25%. To me, that's not possible. That simply isn't possible. It's not a mistake. It's not an unforeseen event. It's not a near miss. It was done without any regard. There was just, it was a conscious decision not to miss the targets, but to totally ignore the targets. And I mean, to me, that's, we have all the monitoring, well, we have not all the monitoring in the world, but we have a huge amount of monitoring capability. And to have that kind of miss without knowing why we missed it, and no one is asking, how did we miss? To me, that just smacks of institutional corruption, institutions which simply don't function in the national interest. And there's a complete disconnect between goals as stated and any mechanism to deliver the progress to the goals. So basically, unless we have the mechanism to deliver the goals that we feel are important outside of GDP growth, and without any discussion, certainly in the media, I don't know if you ever read a story about why Canada missed its targets. I don't remember seeing one. And when I proposed, when I wrote stories to explain why, they certainly didn't make it into the media. But things changed though with COVID-19. All of a sudden, COVID-19 came along and changed things. I would say other systemic lies, once you removed GDP as the mantra, we need to be talking about equality levels, quality of life, affordable housing, job quality, debt, well-being, and protection from exploitive and parasitic interests. And this should be quantified. We should have metrics for this. And we should be applying them. We aren't doing that on a national basis. So these things should stand up with, should be on the same table with environmental sustainability. And that's how we should be making the national maintenance policies and setting goals using these metrics, but we aren't doing that. 30-year trend. Globalism has been seen globalism has been seen as an immense transfer of wealth from those who produce it to those who acquire it. People who don't produce anything in terms of finance have acquired a huge amount of wealth. People who produce it have been losing the wealth that they've been acquiring debt. So these trends certainly underwrite general dissatisfaction. We've seen growth in low service jobs, wealth production in terms of farming, manufacturing, the people who create real wealth. We don't focus on that. We let manufacturing slip away. We gave it away, actually. And we focus on turning dollars, transferring dollars. There's a huge emphasis now on housing, housing valuations. Everybody thinks they're making money, but they aren't making money on housing. It's actually a transfer. It's a transfer from the people who own the houses to the from the people who are going to buy the houses. So it's an intergenerational transfer from young to old. And it's highly inefficient mechanism because it comes with all kinds of debt service charges, etc. So we've been measuring GDP, and yes, this turbocharges GDP, but it does nothing for the production of real wealth. Now, gerrymandered politics in the US, this is back to the US. We see a large number of voting districts which will only vote for one party. And that unfortunately produces the effect that people simply, there's no discussion of real issues. There's no common basis for discussion of well-being, no meaningful debate because you're not going to convert the other people. So all you have to do is get your vote out and you don't have to worry about what the people in the other party think. You've got media that are strictly on one side or the other, and lying becomes acceptable and calling people liars becomes acceptable because everybody believes they are representing the larger truth and their own higher morality. And of course, the coverage by the media itself is virtually desperate as they hype and distort the smallest incidents and comments, so that you have extreme comments, just a back and forth exchange of extreme comments, which will never open up a discussion. And just to illustrate this, these districts, gerrymandered district, you should have essentially a district should be relatively symmetrical, I think. And here you have districts that are developed, voting districts that have been developed and gerrymandered, rigged, so that one party will win the majority, even though they have a minority of votes. They will get the majority of the elected representatives. So system breakdown. So what are the national conversation? Further comment on Fox News. If we could trust our government and the media, then we wouldn't have conspiracy theories. But alas, that's the way the environment is. And you just have to wade through the comments section in various sites, Fox, CBC, Globe and Mail, etc., to see the extremes of commentary. But media corporations are playing to their market, not necessarily the broad base of people in the country. Okay. Again, I think I'm overstressing the need to come up with alternate metrics. So let's just move on. We focused on economics and commercial economics rather than science, and whether it's environmental science or social science. And I think this has eroded the confidence in the entire coverage of traditional media sources, which you can see here. There are no winners here in terms of the media. Their trust in the media continues to decline, and I think this is a multi-decade trend, just shown in the last 4 years. But people just don't just don't trust not only what's being said, but they don't trust the people saying it now. They don't trust the institutions. One great example of this, thankfully, came in the last couple of days. Fox News, Tucker Carlson blamed the entire grid problem for the Great Texas Whiteout. His quote was, he blamed it on wind turbines freezing up. Said the windmills failed like the silly fashion accessories they are. You've got to love that quote. I mean, windmills work all over the world. They work in Alberta when it's 30 Celsius colder. And that's just a fabulous quote. Anyway, and so it meant that the green energy doesn't work. So you can now take that example and throw the whole renewable energy program out the window. He did mention a couple of realities, though. And he said people who support wind farms live very far from where the wind farms are going to be located. People who live near where the wind farms are going to be located have a different view. I share that view. Wind turbines are absolutely critical to going renewable. There's no way around it. But I certainly wouldn't want one near me. I mean, it's just industrialization of the landscape. Anyway, but you can see how one small incident and the discussion goes hyperbolic. And that's an indication of how sick and how dysfunctional the news coverage is. It creates and supports opposing camps and extreme views instead of trying to develop a roundtable discussion. Now, this is not limited to the United States, as we know. The Dutch have had recent problems with riots over masking and restrictions. They're Dutch are very orderly. I got a speeding ticket for doing 102 in a 100 zone in the Netherlands, and they're pretty well organized. But this speaks to the fact that there's a huge simmering discontent within a lot of countries, so that here the coverage of this incident was the young people are experiencing employment precarity and the rise of flexible contracts. They're demoralized. Housing is growing much more expensive, and they're simply unhappy. And so when this COVID comes along, and that's just the last straw. And I think with populism, generally with this level of discontent, whether it's the yellow vest protests in France over an additional 5% tax on diesel, sparking protests and riots, or masks and COVID restrictions in the Netherlands. People are very unhappy, and it just takes one little issue to send them into the streets. I think here we can see that life satisfaction versus the rate of growth of Canadian cities. Growth hasn't done much for Canadians, and I would say in the last 50 years, growth has done very little for most of the people in the Western world. This cartoon is in here because I like it. It's got lots of attitude. And it represents, from the Western point of view, perhaps the effect of globalism on our society. It has to be said that there have been tremendous benefits to globalism and free trade. China has done extremely well out of it, and many countries, the working poor in many countries are far less poor than they would have been without globalism. So it spread technology around the world. It's also spread labor around the world. But the losers here have been mostly in the Western democracies. In the West, we've seen high wage, high productivity, high quality jobs shifted to other jurisdictions, other countries who have low wages, low productivity, and low quality initially, workers with low or no industrial standards. That's how they can be so cheap. That's how they can do it so cheaply. They simply weren't working to producing the quality or paying the wages that the jobs in the West were. The Western leaders thought they were participating in a market system, a free trade market system, whereas I certainly believe that it was a clear strategy of China to use these supposed free trade to build a modern state with control of resources across the planet, so they could assure themselves of a stable supply of resources. And these are just two completely often conflicting approaches to it. But whatever we entered into in globalism, it wasn't a free market. There were two totally different agendas. The Chinese had a strategy. I don't believe there was a strategy by Western leaders. They felt that the market was the goal, making the market larger. Increasing trade would solve everything, just like expanding GDP. Okay, so the current policy lens is really about size of the market, strength of the housing market. That's basically the way our decisions are being made now. I think the basis on which they're being made. But that's the immediate truth for business and governments. The popular truth that the discontented live is social cohesion. What's my life like? And how is the community doing? How are my kids doing? This isn't involved in in this. This isn't represented by GDP. The greater truth, which I think everyone listening to this would endorse, is a biophysical reality, the environmental reality of our planet that is best represented by biophysical economics, real systems, real physical systems being reflected, represented by real physical units. How does the planet function? How healthy is it? That's and we have to put these three things together. So what I'm saying is that the full context of national policy has to be nation building. We have to take all of these things into account. We can no longer just rely on GDP. And that's a necessary truth. We need to prosper and perhaps have a chance of maintaining ourselves as sophisticated societies as we deal with environmental decline, climate change, and the depletion of key natural resources. So the commercial economy has to operate within the structure of a cohesive society. And the entire human enterprise, thanks for that term to Bill Reeves, has to operate within a healthy biosphere. COVID, we've had the great fortune to have COVID-19 come along, and it really changed the way, at least in the short term, governments make decisions. You have people like Donald Trump and Doug Ford standing up in front of graphs created by scientists and medical experts and basing their opinion, or basing the policy, pretty radical social policy changes on the opinions of these experts. And that was exceptional. They also, not in so much in Trump's case, but the leaders focused on public welfare and not the growth of the commercial economy. It took people dying in Italian hospital corridors, bodies stacked up. It took that image and the immediacy of do something now, or in 3 weeks we're going to have a huge problem. It took that to get politicians to change, and some did. I mean, who thought that Ford would do as well as he has done? If we look at the levels of social crisis and how we respond, I think it shows the difficulty that we're facing, because the long-term plans, strategy, or problems we face, like climate change and resource depletion, these are really subtle. And I know hurricanes and ice storms aren't subtle, but the change is subtle, and they take place over long periods of time. If you look at the Titanic, the sinking of the Titanic, if you were on the Titanic, it hits the iceberg, everybody on board knows there's a huge problem. Threat level, the ship is going to be on the bottom of the North Atlantic in 2 hours. You've got 2 hours to do something. Perfect clarity of the issue. People reacted, I believe, as best they could. They had the ship's designer on board, and he's the one who came up with the 2 hour prediction. I think it was 140 minutes or something. Anyway, and there were no groups saying, oh, we shouldn't do anything, or, oh, there's not a problem. Pandemic happened pretty quickly. People were dying. Threat level to the world, to the planet, wasn't large, but it was certainly a significant threat to health systems and some certainly vulnerable groups. The time to disaster was 6 weeks, so you have to act pretty darn quickly. Clarity of the issue, I think, was 80%. Maybe some people thought it was a phony issue, but I think despite noise level in the media, I think that was a relatively small number. And again, governments mostly reacted. Some reacted well, some didn't react well, but they did address the problem directly. There were very few strong national lobby saying we shouldn't do anything, despite the fact that individuals and businesses were going to take a large hit. Climate change, longer term, threat level 10, failure to deal with it will essentially mean the end of advanced human society on the planet, I think. Pick your own time frame of when we have to have our act together on decarbonizing. Clarity of the issue, most people recognize that. Reaction strength, we haven't done much. So that's only a 3. And very strong and powerful interest groups saying that we need to take it easy here or we've got it wrong, because they'll suffer distinct financial losses. Resource depletion, basically the same thing. Longer time frame, clarity of the issue, that's not clear at all exactly how this is going to hit or what impact it's going to have. Reaction strength, we haven't done much on it at all. Interest group, business as usual, very strong. So COVID really laid down a template for how we can begin to approach the other biophysical threats. And it's been a huge benefit for us. What it taught us, it should have taught us, is how to identify a problem and blow the alarm early and activate emergency systems ASAP. Have a good look at it, don't bury it. Involve experts as soon as a threat is identified. Get data and test. Get the best information as possible. Build models. Formulate a plan for getting ahead of the problem and execute it with resolve. And in the words of one of the top pandemic leaders, New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern, get on it hard and early. And I think New Zealand and Taiwan have done, and Australia have done about the best of any countries, plus China, belatedly, done phenomenally good jobs on this. So they handled the problem. What we need is a common vision of the public good, and that's what we had when we dealt with COVID. The public good was pretty darn clear. And we were able to step away from the GDP metric for just a minute and deal with the pandemic. But we need to put GDP in the background for a while and deal with social health and environmental health so that we can deal with our common problems. We need to have a common means of what it represents, the benefit of community cohesion, and we need to start talking to each other on fundamental levels. So we need to reestablish the national conversation, and that will reduce the threat of the pent-up dissatisfaction, commonly called populism. That will prevent that from blowing up in one particular way that might be triggered by perhaps an unfortunate incident, and we fail to deal with the fundamental issues. So we need the conversation, and we need the metrics to represent well-being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our first, I'll just tell Cameron right now, he's going to go first on the questions. We have a very good list of stimulating questions, and I suspect, as we said earlier, arguments. And I think I'm going to get going to it quite quickly. But as the moderator, I get a couple of comments before we go. Just to mention, there are several people here at this meeting who are working now through the Club of Rome on the notion of how we replace GDP with something else. And we will keep you people informed on where we go and how we define that and how we do get to somewhere where you have something useful. So that is in the works. Also, one question or one comment, which is people seem to have incredible expectations of their leaders. And yet I'm not certain if there is any ability, even in the case of Ardern, of really satisfying them. I'm not sure why anybody would really want to be a leader these days. It does seem to reach its best before date very quickly. Anyway, that said, I would like to turn the next question over to Cameron, who's first in our list. I've looked at the questions that are out and they're all pretty good, so we're going to just follow right through them. Cameron, you're first. Okay.
Mr. Meyer, wonderful presentation. I just wanted to ask for your opinion. Would you say a reason for the rise in populism, at least in the Occident, is due to the erosion of democratic capitalism? Another way of putting this is the centralizing of assets by a cabal-like apparatus.
Yeah. Okay, the question is, could you say the question again, please? I mean, I made the point in the presentation that certainly the rich, the division of assets vastly favors the well-to-do, and I'm not sure that they're productive. But what would your question be in terms of that division? I mean, why is it? Let me put it to you this way: why would the division now, in 2021, be different from the way it was, say, in 1921, 100 years ago? There was a fair amount of division then, but it was different. The people who held the wealth were actually real wealth producers, oil companies, manufacturing, the energy, and these are the people who were creating wealth, but they were creating benefit. Whereas now, I think the people who are acquiring wealth are doing through financial means of transfers and inflation, rather than actually producing the real wealth that would substantiate their accumulation, their wealth on paper. Is that? Can you break it down?
Oh, that's a sufficient answer. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Apparently, we're all using different sources of information and all coming from different directions. So Gabriella has a comment to maybe put us right.
I don't. Well, that's thanks. Well, thanks, John, very much for the presentation. It was very good. I actually have my comment and my question early in your presentation. So after that, I had more comments, but I'll just leave with one. You were mentioning Globe and Mail, for example, as one of the venues through which people had some or felt they could have some conversation. My comment was, and followed by a question, was that these days there are many different platforms of digital media.
Yes.
Between various groups or tribes, and they're based on age, gender, affiliations.
Yes.
So the Globe and Mail is not being read by young generation like my children. Whether they, I have children that are, say, in their 30s, some are older. They don't read Globe and Mail, and they don't watch TV and the news. So all these are kind of contributing to a loss of cohesiveness in opinions in these countries. So the question is, should we follow EU's and Australia's example of requesting digital giants to pay for the local or the national news? Would that help, you think, regain a national conversation?
That's really difficult. I think it's just not the interest. I think it's the way people read. There's one fellow in town here, very sharp, in his mid-30s. He won't read a book. He only refers to tweets and very short shots of information. And he takes these little things and patches them together. And I don't even think he'd read a 600 word newspaper article. So there's no context, there's no flow of logic that you can appreciate. And even if you disagree with some of the things in an article, you can say, well, that sort of makes sense. I think now with the digital realm, you've got the ability to go to hyper-specific sources, and hence conspiracy theories and take place very easily or develop very easily. So I think to be honest, I don't have an answer. I know I'm very aware that the Globe knew that it was losing younger readership, and they've been trying to deal with that for the last 10 or 12 years. But I think it's the kind of stuff they put out, the kind of articles they have, plus the fact that younger people can now take, instead of reading one newspaper article a day, can read 100 tweets a day. And attempt to digest their information that way, whereas I wouldn't call it information. So I think now that we've dispersed like that, I think it's extremely difficult to put these issues back together. And I would say there has to be something built into the election mechanism where you list people's platforms and criticisms and this kind of thing in fair detail that people can actually access easily. The Australian attempt to to have the digital media somehow support news, I just don't know. I mean, in Canada, we've got the government taxpayer dollars going to what I would call the mainstream media in support. And to me, all they're supporting is business as usual. I don't have a solution. That's a problem as I see it, but I just don't have a solution.
So John, is the only job left in newspapers the headline writer?
Is which writers? What,
is sorry? The headline writer?
Virtually. And of course, if you go on the Fox News site from time to time, you will see that the headline writer has a different job from the copy editor, because sometimes the headlines have nothing to do with the actual text of the article. So,
well,
okay, go for it.
There is something about the new platforms that maybe can be adopted.
I would hope so, but that means government intervention, and it has to be national intervention. Mm-hmm. The market won't fix this. So you're going to have and it becomes difficult because you've got politicians and the community, hopefully through the community and goodwill or benefit in mind, trying to form the national conversation. And that, I think there are a lot of people who will be distrustful of that.
Vic is going to talk next. He's got a question that actually follows very nicely.
Thank you for the presentation, John. I guess what my concern is the underappreciation of the role of wealth distribution and the creation of populism. I say, in the United States, for example, Trump very cleverly appealed to the top wage earners and the bottom earners through different tracks. 1% of the population in the States controls 85% of the wealth. Horrendous. So how did he appeal to them? He cut taxes, corporate taxes, everything else. Yep. And created a rosy field for them. And what did he do for the bottom layer? He said, we're going to stop these Mexicans coming in and taking your low-caste jobs. Yep. And recognize that, the United States had one of the lowest minimum wages in the world, about $7 a year or two ago an hour. I mean, incredible. And then you look at the lack of Medicare, You look at the cost of drugs, so much higher in the States where they're manufactured, and in Canada, it's out of the reach of poor people. And so what happens is Trump sticks an attraction out to both groups and brings them on side, thinking their life is going to be better, but in reality, it's not. And I think, we have to look as societies at the wage distribution in a totally different way. Anyway, your observations appreciated.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, he did, but wages actually, for the first time in decades, wages at the bottom end of the wage scale real wages did go up in the US. And that's why I think Trump tripled his black vote, 2020 over 2016. And I think that was a large contributor to that. But in terms of Medicare government support, I mean, now I see the US and to a large degree the Western world as being such a mess financially. What money is real, what money isn't real, what does debt mean, what do deficits mean? I think it's going to be very hard to put together any kind of rational response that's going to work in the long term. Anyway, next question.
Next question's from Bill Pugsley.
Thank you, and great presentation there, John. I was interested, given you've mentioned Jacinda Ardern several times, how can we compare, because I view New Zealanders and Australians to some extent like the typical Canadian in terms of their government and sense of government. And I'm wondering why New Zealand is making such headway or has less pushback on things like COVID and getting to zero carbon than Canada, the USA does. And I'm wondering if it's part of the dynamics of influence on political power, the size of the oil and gas industry and their influence over politicians in Canada and the US compared to New Zealand, where I guess if you're a sheep farmer, that would be the #1 push, and they must be on the right side of history. But I just wondered if you'd ever thought about that.
Oh yeah, well, I think who sits at the table to make policy is extremely important, and you have to have all interests represented. If you have some extremely powerful groups in the country, like oil and gas and finance and speculators, developers, etc., they've got the money. They're the people who donate to the politicians, and these are the people who are going to have a large impact on policy. If you have a nation of sheep farmers and tourist operators and shop operators and a few other small industries distributed, and you have no massive buildup of a very powerful interest, then I think that's where democracy works. If you look at Norway, the way they approached their oil wealth, they knew they were going to have problems with a number of factors, and they sat everybody down at the table and figured out how they were going to handle this oil wealth. In Alberta, it was just handed over to industry in effect. And so you see the immense difference. So it's having all interests sitting down at the table and figuring out what's best and not letting some one or two power groups drive policy, like having the tobacco industry write health legislation or something like that.
Yeah, I can understand that for climate and zero carbon, but New Zealand also stood out in their reaction to COVID, in getting everyone on board. And I guess part of the answer is it's an island and you only have 5 airports, you shut it down, which makes it a lot easier than in Canada. Yeah,
that's true, but I'm pretty sure that COVID got to Canada via airports.
Have you heard anything at all from Mr. Paul Cohen?
Hello.
Yeah.
Anita, are you on?
Cowan. Sorry.
Okay. I have a comment from Anita Thorhog, I think. Oh, maybe she's.
It's more difficult to shut down the Canadian border, but it's not impossible. And we didn't have the intent to do that.
Yeah, I lived in New Zealand. I lived in New Zealand for a while, John, and There's, it's small and it's pretty well homogeneous, and that has come a long way in terms of allowing them to achieve a degree of social cohesion. It also has a cult of equality to some extent. The tall poppy syndrome, rich folks are not really tolerated. So there's a cult, even though they are there, they don't stand out and try and convince other people that they're better.
Okay.
So it is a more homogeneous place than we are.
Yeah,
our next comments from somebody who knows a lot about how to get equality and happiness. Julia, do you want to go next, please?
Thank you, Ted. And thank you for inviting me to this group. It's my first meeting with the Canadian group, CACOR. Yeah, I think I was curious, John, thank you for a brilliant presentation. If we're thinking about new beyond GDP metrics for Canada, what could we learn from Canada's previous experience with things like the Canadian Wellbeing Index, Genuine Progress Indicator, so that we could maybe have a more coordinated movement towards a well-being economy at this particular moment? Thinking also of how organizations like David Suzuki Foundation are trying to catalyze a national movement around this. They're, I believe, recruiting now for a well-being economy expert. So how can we learn from the past and bring it into this present moment? That was one of my questions.
Okay, that's an excellent question. The well-being, the trouble with well-being and all these metrics that I'm proposing, whether it's social or environmental, is that they're complicated. Dollars are simple. You know, more dollars better. And that's dead simple. And well-being is a little bit more complex. So it's for the well-educated people who are focusing on it, people who have made themselves educated on the subject, I think it's absolutely critical. But there aren't enough of these people to really build a body of that is going to drive this to fruition. I don't think any, from my point of view, the NDP and the Green Party should be leading this charge on the things that we've talked about here, the things that you just mentioned. But I don't think they're doing that. And that's the problem. There has to be a higher level of discussion and a higher level of responsibility. I hope that COVID can sort of start this process, because we've seen that, okay, you can live differently, and in some ways it's better. I think you need someone with a lot of money, and you need a Donald Trump, dare I say it, David Lewis, Thompson, you know, a real national leader to pick this up and run with it, a charismatic leader. And I think that's what is required. Someone to pick this up and run with it. And just some academics pushing these ideas, I don't think they'll go far. You need money to overcome undoubtedly media resistance, corporate media resistance to them, and you need some charismatic leader, which has that individual has not made themselves apparent in this country.
But aren't they on this call at this time? And put your hand up and take the leadership role and tell people what we really mean.
And who has 20 million in their pocket to make this work?
Yeah, no, we are struggling certainly to define collective understanding of what people really want, and also what they're prepared to do to actually achieve it. Julie, I think your second question fits perfectly right here now, if you wish.
Sure. Maybe just a quick response to John maybe for further discussion later. I'd be curious if we could learn from Trumpism, and that we don't see a well-being economy as just belonging to NDP or Green Party, because I think you referenced Wilkinson and Pickett. There's a lot of good research on inequality and how it's really harming the wealthy brackets. So yeah, to maybe broaden the appeal of well-being economy beyond parties might be something to think about. But my second question really is, how contagious is populism? Because we've been seeing what's happening in the US. We know COVID's contagious, but we saw Canada step up quickly and call out Proud Boys as a terrorist group. I know Canadians at this moment are feeling, you know, in some ways this is a good time to see this is how we're different from what's happening in the US. But we also know that this can be a bit of a contagious thing. What can we do proactively to slow down any spillover of that from the US to Canada?
Well, I think the problem is that you see maybe the Proud Boys or whoever are extreme fringe of populism. And if you shut down the extreme fringe, you know, you're tightening your grip on the debate. So you're saying these people, we can't tolerate these people, so we're going to shut them down. And if you're a populist, if you're basically discontent, you may say, well, okay, then they're shutting down my ability to speak my objections. And I think any time a government, and this is the automatic reaction, if there's discontent, they automatically stamp down on the extremes of the discontent, and therefore foment perhaps more discontent in the long run. So it's a really delicate operation, and I think the governments and the elites have to let go of the grip and allow a broader discussion with more people sitting at the chair, even if they at the table, even if they don't like what's being said. You have to allow the voices, and I think then the extremists will be more or less overwhelmed by the moderates, because you'll have this cathartic process where people can express their frustrations and express their objectives and their ideals without being denounced as deplorable or whatever. So on the other hand, you can't have people, you've got to, at some point, you've got to cut things off if they're supporting violence. So it's difficult to do, and not that many people have done it successfully, I don't think.
Thanks, John. I have two more formal questions, after which time we'll then shut off the mic and you can say what you really want. Okay. Because sometimes people have things they don't want to go on record for. But the next one is from Mary Hagan, please. Put your mic on. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to tell you to put your mic on.
Okay. Yeah, my question is around replacing the GDP metric with sort of a well-being, more what they call the donut economy type of metric, in a way that allows people to be engaged and to build new trust with this metric. How does one go about that?
I think you have to build into the metrics very visibly their concerns. Income, now equality, that doesn't carry much weight. People don't go into Tim Hortons or throw a Molotov cocktail through a window because they say, well, the system, I feel unequal. It's their jobs that disappeared. It's the housing they can't afford. And it's the congestion, their quality of life has gone downhill. They have no access to nature. They can't afford to live in the same areas that their parents live in. Their parents have to leave. They're more expensive now, very expensive neighborhoods. It's those issues. You have to speak to those issues, I think. And that's where the academic approach of equality levels, that's how we measure things. But in terms of getting people to buy into them, into accepting them, I think you have to speak to them on their terms that address their specific problems: job quality, stability, and safe neighborhoods, whatever. Whatever it is, you have to speak in those terms and not just the overarching academic metrics which academics and policymakers might employ to monitor this.
Remember, John, Canada has been a leader in development of participatory processes, more than most other countries. And I know I've been working with the UN for years, running participatory processes around the world. And the big difference is that we actually ask people what they do want. And that for many comes as almost a breakthrough. because it's the first time that somebody official ever actually asked them what they wanted, and perhaps asked them if they wanted to work with them to try and find a way to do it. It does go over better, and it goes over better in almost every culture.
Okay.
Little hard to get some people to actually talk. It used to be really rough when we tried to do stuff around the Black Sea just after the Soviet Union, because they were afraid to say anything for fear somebody would report them. But almost nowhere else in the world now is that an issue. And even in China, as long as the government tells them it's okay for them to participate, they will. And you end up with some fairly reasonable developments, but it's not universal.
How do those efforts compare to the Bhutanese index of happiness?
Yeah, I think that's a very good person to ask. I hope Julia's still there, because she helped develop it. And maybe you can tell us what really works there.
Thanks, Ted. And thanks, John. Yeah, I haven't been directly involved with the survey, but working closely with this, the Center for Bhutan Studies that did put it together. You know, what's interesting there is that the actual measuring tool came out of a culture that was already talking a lot about well-being. So very much part of the Buddhist and Bhutanese idea of well-being and of all life, not just humans, as being really important. But that said, as they moved towards a constitutional democracy and realized that political parties and so on would be coming into play, as well as a trusted monarchy, they realized they needed to change their instruments and be able to measure that. So that's when the survey started to become much more a part of the national consciousness. And now it's almost as if civil society is catching up with the survey part. They understood the philosophy, but now the measurement tool needs to be understood, and it's been brought into government policy making and decision making at around the same time, the last 10 years. So in that way, it's a very interesting experiment. And I think that question and that point that you raised, Ted, about asking people was done informally. I mean, it was part of the culture already, but then to correlate that with a national understanding of how do you measure that and why is this important, that is a part that is even happening now. It's an iterative process.
Okay.
Thank you. I have two more questions to wrap up with. I only had one a minute ago, but now I have two, and you're going to have both before we let you guys go. So Gabriella, you're head of the Values Committee. Would you like to ask your question?
Okay, I for some reason my video is, okay, here it is. All right. So I was just wondering when I was listening to your presentation and I saw one of the slides, the wealth producers that you mentioned did not include anything that had to do with arts creators.
Well, that's
so I just wonder why not?
Well, I think you can list a million people, like 90% of the people in the country are real contributors, whether it's the guy who screws the tires on the wheels on the car, or the salesman in the showroom, the nurses, doctors, educators, artists, all these people contribute, musicians, they all contribute. And what I was trying to do was differentiate between the people who make a genuine contribution and who get paid their $20 because they've made a contribution, as opposed to the people who produce nothing except perhaps print their own money through banking practices, finance practices, or inflation. And they haven't contributed anything in a real sense. And yet they get paid a lot, and they accumulate a lot. So that's what I was trying to differentiate between real wealth producers and real wealth accumulators. And in the past, in this country's history and nation building, and I think works for all countries, the fisheries, the people who ran the fish processing plants, the fur traders, the farmers, the agricultural interests, the transportation industries, these people, the manufacturers, they all became powerful and influential, but they contributed, and whatever excesses they committed they were still contributing. Whereas now our economy is, our policies are dictated by very powerful interest developers and finance interests, which produce nothing. So that's the point I was trying to make.
Right. Do you think universal income will help?
Certainly not with an open border, and I think there should be a universal access to work, because the idea that you have to show up for work for 40 hours or so much, some people can't do that. I think you have to have work that people can do, and I think that is the way it can work. The worst thing you can do is pay someone to sit down at home and do nothing. I think people want to contribute. In Finland, that program didn't work particularly well, I don't think. But there has to be a minimum income level. I think the US tried mandatory work in one particular program I read about. It was like they were punishing the workers. They had them working in bad conditions, immense commutes, it just didn't work. So I think work should be uplifting and fulfilling and accessible.
I'm going to give this one to Jeff Passmore now. I missed him. He just reminded me that I missed him there. So Jeff, would you mind putting your thing on and get your comment, please? And then I'll go to John for the last word.
I'm trying to start my video, but maybe it's because Art got rid of it. Oh, here we are.
No,
okay.
It's all on, and I have control of it.
We prefer the photograph.
We're fine. We're fine. Now I'm here. Thanks, John. Just one piece of information with respect to your comment about the Texas situation. The Texas Tribune reported last week that the Electric Reliability Council of Texas said that there were 16 gigawatts of renewable energy generation, mostly from wind, that were offline in the storm, and almost double that, 30 gigawatts, were offline from thermal energy, including gas, coal, and nuclear. So that's a useful number to have for all the people who keep coming out and saying it's renewable energy's fault. Another quick comment. You mentioned that you thought the candidate should be Bernie Sanders. I would be very concerned that if the equivalent of Bernie Sanders were the presidential candidate in 2024, the Democrats will lose the election. They really need to nominate a moderate, and that probably isn't Kamala Harris. But it's because of all those 73 million people that, that are out there that are, plus a lot of people who voted Democrat who wouldn't vote Democrat if Bernie Sanders had been the nominee. The other interesting thing, listening to US news, is that there seem to be two Republican parties in the US, the one in Washington that believes in, smaller government and less taxes, and then all the quote unquote real people that live in the states at the grassroots level who believe in no immigration and build the wall, and those people are certainly not going away, as you pointed out, but they're not going to support anything close to a Kamala Harris in the next election. But my question is, and you sort of answered it a little bit when Julia was talking, you said we need to reestablish the national conversation. And if you were a politician and the presentation that you made to us today was your platform, then I'm pretty sure you would lose. So how do we start or reestablish the national conversation?
Yeah, that's the issue, isn't it? I think the first thing is recognizing that there is a problem. And I think the CBC and the Globe and Mail, who pride themselves or promote themselves as broad-based media, progressive broad-based media, I think they have to start embracing a wider demographic, wider opinions. I think the discussion has to get more technical from the point of view of biophysical metrics. I think we need models, and one of the things that one of the reasons for the lie of Canada's failure to meet its carbon emission targets is there are no models. If we had models, people could access it, and I'm talking about qualified, interested people. And if you're interested, you will become qualified over time. So we can have a discussion on why we missed. But now there is no model. And if you look at the government policies and plans that have been laid out, whether it's to sustainable, to reduce emissions or make Canada sustainable, there's no population policy. There's nothing specific on renewable energy infrastructure. We have no targets we're aiming for. And we need to have that to find out where we're going wrong, the real mechanics. And I think it's been a very conscious effort by those in power, not necessarily politicians, but those in power who are calling the shots, to have no basis for discussion, no comparable data. So you completely short circuit any rational discussion. So I think we need models, and we need clear national goals, and I think that will underwrite a broad-based discussion.
It's a great segue into what I want John to talk about right now, because he does get the last word before I get you all to just turn off the video, and we can just keep talking as long as people want. John, over to you.
Thank you, Ted. John Meyer, I've been looking at you as an energy guru, and I find I only had a small part of the picture. You're actually a political science junkie, and so thank you for the talk. You drew a lesson from the experience with COVID, and that was that some authorities drew on knowledge, expertise gained from the domain of science.
Who could believe it?
Well, hardly. But my observation would be that in our federal House of Commons, just 7% of the members have a degree in one of the science, technology, engineering, math fields. And of those, 4 have masters and 2 have PhDs. One of those would be Mark Garneau, I think. So it's one thing for this kind of body of people to receive advice, scientifically engineering informed advice, but do they understand it? And I would say that the COVID shows that the understanding has varied substantially from, let's say, British Columbia and maybe New Brunswick to Ontario, which is where we're sitting. I have 2 nieces in England. They're 40 years old. They had their first shot a week and a half ago. I'm double their age in round numbers. I have no idea because Mr. Ford doesn't have any idea when I'm going to be caught. So what's the prospect? What can people with a scientific background like me do to help to engage in the political process? And is it a very long job to achieve governments and decision makers that are scientifically literate?
Well, I think the way the current system is set up, the chance of anyone who is technically literate making it through the media filter and talking about issues that the media really doesn't want to hear. I mean, the newspapers do not want to hear anything about no growth. Yeah, they don't want to hear that. They won't support it at all. That's death. If you want yourself not to be quoted in the media, come up with that platform. So I think what's needed is, as I mentioned before, a huge whack of money and people like the qualified people, such as we have here, who have an interest, and there are tens of thousands across the country running for office in some kind of political party that may not expect to be elected, but will bring these issues forward, because it isn't going to come through the mass media. It just isn't. And I think it would take a lot of money to do it. But for instance, I don't want to drag this out, but I think in the Georgia election for governor, or 2 seats, 2 Senate, maybe it's 2 Senate seats, they spent $400 million. And I don't think it requires that kind of money in Canada, but you need money because you aren't going to get coverage in the media. The media will not cover these issues. You need to inject it into the public somehow. So,
folks, I'm going to call us to finish from the formal session now. Art, are you here to turn off the video? Because I can't.